Your home network has a password on it, and you almost certainly believe that password means your traffic is private. I want to show you exactly how much of that is true. Not to frighten you, the honest answer is more interesting. Wi-Fi encryption does precisely what it says, and people expect it to do about 4 things more. The standard almost every home still runs is more than 20 years old. It arrived in 2004 and has been attacked in public at least 3 separate times since by named researchers who published their work. And every single one of those attacks went after the same thing, not the encryption, the conversation that happens before the encryption starts. So what is your Wi-Fi password actually protecting you from? Who does it not protect you from? And why is the padlock in your browser doing more work than the one on your router? In the next half hour, I will take the whole thing apart in plain language, and by the end, you will know exactly which of your assumptions were never true. Let us start with the word on the label, because the whole confusion lives there. Your network is described as protected or as secured. Both words are doing enormous unearned work. Protected from what? That question has an answer, and the answer is narrower than almost anyone assumes. So let me give you the honest version now and spend the rest of the episode earning it. Wi-Fi encryption protects the radio hop between your device and your access point from people who do not have the password for the contents of what you send. Read that sentence again in a moment, because every important limitation of Wi-Fi security is a word that is missing from it. It says the radial hop, not the journey, just the piece of the journey that travels through the air in your flat and no further than the box in the corner. It says from people who do not have the password, which tells you something uncomfortable about everybody who does. And it says the contents, not the fact that you are sending, not how much, not when, not to roughly where. The contents. Everything else people believe about Wi-Fi security is an extrapolation from those 3 words, and the extrapolations are where the trouble is. Now, why does a radio need encrypting at all when the cable that leads your building does not or did not for most of its history? Because of what radio is. A cable is a private conversation in a corridor. You have to physically get into the corridor and attach something to it. Radio is a conversation shouted in a public square. Everything your laptop transmits leaves the building, whether you like it or not, in every direction, for anyone with a receiver. That is not a flaw. That is what radio is. You cannot aim Wi-Fi at your router. The signal goes through the wall, into the street, into the flat above you, and it is complete. So, wireless networking had a problem that wired networking simply did not have. Anybody nearby is already receiving everything. There is no perimeter to defend. Which means the only possible defense is to make what they receive useless. Not to stop them hearing. You cannot stop them hearing. Only to stop it meaning anything. And the first serious attempt at that was a spectacular failure, which is worth 2 minutes of your time because of what it taught everyone. The first standard was called Wired Equivalent Privacy, and the name is a confession. The goal was stated as being about as private as a cable, not more. Equivalent. That is a modest and honest ambition, and it did not achieve it. The scheme had structural weaknesses in how it used its encryption, and they were not subtle. The practical result was that a network could be broken not through some enormous computation, but by listening long enough. Time, not effort. That is the worst possible property for a security system because it degrades on its own. Every hour the network operates it is closer to being opened, and nothing about that is visible from inside. The lesson everybody took from it was not really about that specific scheme. It was that the hard part is not choosing a cipher. The hard part is everything around the cipher. How the key is generated, how it is agreed, how often it changes, what happens when a message arrives twice, what happens when a message does not arrive at all. Those are the joints, and every attack in this episode is an attack on a joint. Nobody in the story ever breaks the encryption itself. I want that established early because it keeps being true. So the replacement was designed properly. An interim version came first, and then in 2004, the full standard arrived, and that is the one you are almost certainly running. It is called Wi-Fi Protected Access 2. Everybody says WPA2, and I will too. It is almost certainly the 2 words printed on the settings screen you have never opened. It uses a genuinely strong cipher, built on the encryption standard that governments and banks use, in a mode designed to give both secrecy and tamper detection at once. And I want to be completely clear about this. That part has held for more than 20 years in the field against everybody. The cipher at the center of WPA2 has not been broken, which is genuinely impressive engineering. And it is also why the rest of this episode is possible. When the middle is solid, all the interesting failures move to the edges. So the design question becomes the one that matters. Your router knows a password, your phone knows the same password. How do they turn that into a key to actually encrypt with? Because they cannot just use the password as the key. If they did, every device on the network would encrypt with an identical key forever. And that is a disaster for reasons I will come to. They need to agree on something fresh, in public, over a radio channel that everybody can hear without ever transmitting the secret. That is the interesting problem, and it has an elegant answer. It is called the 4-way handshake, and it happens every single time a device joins the network. You have caused thousands of these. You've never noticed one. Here is what it achieves. In plain terms, both sides already know the password. Neither side sends it. By the end, both sides hold the same fresh encryption key, and anyone listening holds nothing useful. The trick is that both sides mix the shared password with 2 fresh random numbers, one chosen by each side, and those random numbers are sent openly. That sounds wrong the first time you hear it. The random numbers are public, but the recipe needs the password as well, and the password never travels. So a listener has 2 of 3 ingredients and cannot finish. It is the same shape as 2 people who share a private phrase agreeing a fresh code word in front of a crowd. The crowd hears everything said. They still cannot produce the code word. 4 messages, hence the name, and the 4 are not all the same job, which turns out to matter enormously later. Roughly, the access point sends its random number. The device replies with its own and with proof that it knows the password. The access point confirms and hands over an extra key. The device acknowledges. That last message, the acknowledgement, is the one to watch. Everything in this episode eventually comes back to the 4th message. Now, a detail that sounds like housekeeping and is not. Once both sides have the key, they start numbering the packets they send with it. Every packet gets the next number, 1, 2, 3, onwards, and the number is fed into the encryption so that the same content encrypted twice never looks the same, twice. That counter is not an optional nicety, it is load-bearing. A whole class of encryption breaks catastrophically if you ever use the same key with the same counter value for 2 different messages. Not degrades, breaks. It can hand an attacker a direct relationship between the 2 messages and from there, information about what they contained. So the rule is absolute, and every implementer knows it. Never reuse a counter with a given key. Ever. The whole construction rests on that counter only ever going forwards. Hold on to that. In about 10 minutes, somebody's going to make that counter go backwards, and they will do it without ever touching the encryption at all. But before the attacks, I owe you the honest inventory, what this design genuinely delivers when it is working perfectly and nobody is attacking anything. When WPA2 is working exactly as designed, here is what a person sitting outside your building with the receiver gets. They can tell your network exists because the access point announces itself constantly and that announcement is not encrypted. It has to be readable or nothing could ever find it. They can see how many devices are attached because the addresses on each packet are outside the encrypted part. The envelope is readable. Only the letter inside is not. They can see the size of everything you send and receive and the exact moment you send it. Volume and timing are not hidden by encrypting contents. They cannot be. And that combination is more revealing than people expect. A pattern of traffic has a shape. When a household wakes, when it sleeps, when it is empty, when something starts streaming. What they cannot do, and this is the real achievement, is read what is inside the packets. That part works. Genuinely, in the field for 20 years. So the guarantee is real, but it is a guarantee about contents from outsiders on one hop. Now let me take those 3 qualifiers apart one at a time, because each hides something. Start with one hop. Your data goes from your laptop to your router. The Wi-Fi encryption covers that journey and stops dead at the router. At that point, your router decrypts it entirely and by design and passes it on to your internet provider in whatever form it was originally in. Wi-Fi encryption was never end-to-end and was never meant to be. It protects the piece that travels through the air. Past the box in the corner, it has done its job and gone home. So if you are on a network you do not control, the thing protecting the rest of the journey is not the Wi-Fi password. It is whatever protection the connection itself has, which today, for almost everything, is the encryption in your browser. The padlock. That is the thing carrying your data across the world, and it works the same whether the Wi-Fi is locked or wide open. This is the single most useful correction in this episode. The reason a public network is less dangerous than it was 15 years ago is not better Wi-Fi security. It is that the web became encrypted by default. The improvement happened one layer up, and it happened everywhere at once. Wi-Fi encryption did not get better. The thing riding on top of it did. Now the second qualifier in that sentence, from outsiders, which raises a question people almost never think to ask because the answer is slightly uncomfortable. What about the insiders? On a home network, everybody uses the same password. That is the whole design. One phrase, given to guests, printed on a card, written on the underside of the router. And the handshake we walked through mixes that shared password with fresh random numbers to make each device its own key. So far, so good. Your key is not your neighbor's key. But remember that the random numbers are sent openly. Anyone can hear them, which means anyone who also knows the password has all 3 ingredients for somebody else's key. So a person who has your Wi-Fi password and who is listening when another device joined is in a very different position from a stranger outside. I'm not going to say more than that about mechanism because it is not needed and because this is an explainer, not a manual. The principle is what matters and the principle is simple. Encrypted on a shared password network has never meant encrypted from the other people on the network. It means encrypted from people who were never given the password. There is a second version of this that is even more direct. Alongside each device's private key, the access point hands out a shared key used for messages sent to everyone at once. That one is genuinely common to every device on the network. It has to be, because it is how one message reaches all of them without being sent separately to each. So there is a key on your home network that every attached device holds identically. That is not a defect. Broadcast requires it. But it is worth knowing it exists. Now put that together with how people actually use home networks. The password goes to house guests, to a contractor, to a neighbor's teenager once, 4 years ago. It goes onto a smart plug, a television, a doorbell camera, a printer bought in 2017 that has not received a firmware update since and never will. Every one of those holds the same secret your laptop holds. The security of your network is the security of its least trustworthy holder of that password. And this is exactly what a guest network is for, which is the practical point I want you to take from this act. A guest network is not politeness. It is a separate password, making a separate trust boundary so that the people and things you do not fully control are not inside the same envelope as you. Most routers have had that feature for years, and most households have never switched it on. It is the highest value thing in this entire episode, and it takes about 90 seconds. So that is the design working correctly. Now the attacks, in order, because the order tells a story about where security actually fails. The first one is not really an attack on WPA2 at all. It is an attack on a convenience feature bolted onto the side of it, and it is my favorite example of a certain kind of mistake. Somebody, sensibly, observed that typing a long random password into a printer using arrow keys is miserable. So a simpler method was added, a short numeric code printed on the router. 8 digits. Type the code, join the network, never type the passphrase. Convenient, and the number of possible codes sounds large enough to be safe. It was not, for two reasons that compound with each other in a way that is genuinely painful to watch. In 2011, Stefan Viehbock published the problem. First, the 8th digit is not part of the secret at all. It is a check digit, calculated from the other 7. So the real secret is 7 digits, not 8. The last one carries no information an attacker does not already have. That alone divides the difficulty by 10, before anybody has done anything clever. The second part is worse. The code was not checked as one unit. It was verified in 2 halves, and the response told you which half was wrong. That is fatal. If a lock tells you which half of your key is wrong, you are no longer facing one large problem. You are facing 2 small ones, and you can solve them one after the other. The search collapses from something enormous to at most 10,000 attempts for the first half and 1,000 for the second. Those are small numbers, trivially small. And notice what happened here. The encryption was perfect, the handshake was sound, the password was strong. A convenience feature added a second door with a weaker lock, and the strength of the front door became irrelevant because nobody was going to use the front door. This is the most repeated pattern in the whole of security, and it is why I wanted it first. Systems are rarely defeated at the point they were designed to be strong. They are defeated at the point somebody added later to make the strong part less annoying. The feature can be switched off on most routers, and on many it now is by default. But the shape of the mistake is the thing to carry, because you will see it again everywhere. In October 2017, the 4-way handshake itself was attacked, and this one was different in kind. It was published by Mathy Vanhoef, then at KU Leuven, and it was named KRACK for Key Reinstallation Attack. It did not affect one vendor or one product. It affected essentially every implementation of WPA2 in the world simultaneously, because the problem was not in anybody's code. It was in the specification everybody had implemented correctly. Here is the idea, and I think it is genuinely beautiful in the way that only a really clean attack is. Remember the 4th message of the handshake, the acknowledgement. Radial is unreliable. Messages get lost. So the standard sensibly says, if the acknowledgement does not arrive, send the previous message again. Perfectly reasonable engineering. Networks drop packets constantly, and a handshake that failed permanently every time one went missing would be unusable. But when a device receives that repeated message, it installs the key again. And when it installs the key, it resets the counter. Back to the beginning. And there it is. The counter that must only ever go forwards has been made to go backwards without touching the cipher, without knowing the password, without breaking any mathematics at all. Everything encrypted after that reset reuses counter values that were already used with that key, which is the one thing the whole construction depends on never happening. In that position, an attacker sitting between the device and the access point could decrypt traffic. And depending on the exact configuration, in some cases, inject or replay it. I want to be precise, because this was widely reported as Wi-Fi encryption being broken, and that is not what happened. The cipher was untouched. What was attacked was the state machine around it, the rules about when a key gets installed and what gets reset when it does. A perfect lock, a flawless key, and a rule that said if you are not sure the door closed, try closing it again. And closing it again, reset the alarm. The disclosure was handled carefully and quietly for months before publication, and the result was one of the largest coordinated patching events the industry has seen. Operating systems, router firmware, and chipset vendors shipped fixes together. And here's the good news, which rarely gets the same attention as the alarm. The fix did not require a new standard, new hardware, or a new password. Implementation simply had to refuse to reset the counter when a key was reinstalled. A patched device is not vulnerable to this. Which means, for once, the answer to the question, are we still at risk, is not philosophical. It is entirely about whether each piece of equipment on your network received an update, and about which pieces are old enough that nobody is shipping updates for them anymore. The third attack in the story arrived the following year, and it came from an unexpected direction. In early 2018, Jens Stube, who wrote the widely used password recovery tool Hashcat, found it while looking at the next generation of the standard rather than this one. I like this detail because it is so ordinary. Somebody probing a new system stumbles over something in the old one that had been sitting there in public for years. The significance is best explained by what it removed rather than what it did. Every earlier approach to guessing a Wi-Fi password required capturing a real device joining the network. You had to wait for somebody to come home or provoke a reconnection. That is a real constraint. It means being present at the right moment, and it means doing something that could, in principle, be noticed. What Stube found was that the necessary material could be obtained by talking to the access point directly. No client needed, no waiting for a real device. That is what clientless means here, and it is a meaningful change even though it did not make anything mathematically weaker. Because it moved the attack from something requiring patience and opportunity to something requiring neither. The cost of trying dropped, and when the cost of trying drops, the number of attempts rises. What it did not change is the thing that actually decides the outcome. And this is the part worth remembering. Every one of these approaches ends in the same place, guessing the passphrase. They obtain material that lets a guess be tested quickly and privately, offline, with no further contact. So the defense has never moved. A long, genuinely unpredictable passphrase defeats all of them, because there is nothing to guess your way to in any usable amount of time. A short one, or a memorable phrase, or the name of the household falls to all of them equally. The attack changed. The thing it runs into did not. Now, the part of the episode I actually built it for. Everything so far was a flaw, something wrong, that got fixed. What follows is not flaws. These are things WPA2 never claimed to do, that were never broken, because they were never promised, and they matter more than the attacks. The first one we have covered, and I will restate it because it is the important one, it protects one hop, not the journey. The box in the corner sees everything in the clear, by design. The second, it encrypts contents, not metadata. Who is present, how much they send, when they send it, and how large each exchange is, all remain visible to anyone listening. You cannot fix that by choosing a better password, because it is not a weakness in the encryption. It is a consequence of needing an unencrypted envelope to deliver an encrypted letter. The third is the one that surprises people most. For most of its life, the messages that manage the network, rather than carry your data, were not protected at all. Those are the messages that say things like, "This device is leaving the network." And because they were unauthenticated, anyone could send one claiming to be anyone. Which is why a device can be knocked off a network by somebody with no password at all. Not by breaking anything. By sending an administrative message that was never designed to be checked. A later addition to the standard authenticates those management messages, and it is now widely available and required in the newest generation. But for most of WPA2's life, it was optional and mostly off. And the fourth is the deepest one, because it is not fixable by any amount of engineering inside the protocol. WPA2 authenticates the password. It does not authenticate the access point. Your device does not confirm that the network calling itself by your cafe's name is your cafe's network. It confirms that whoever is running it knows the password. That is all. Which means anything that knows the password, or any network where the password is public and printed on a wall, can be impersonated by something standing closer to you with a stronger signal. Your phone will join it, and it will show you exactly the same reassuring indicator it always shows you, because from the protocol's point of view, nothing whatsoever is wrong. A password proves membership. It has never proved identity. Those are different things. And only one of them is what people think the padlock means. Which brings us to the successor, and to an honest account of what it did and did not solve. Because it did solve something real, and it was oversold anyway. WPA3 was released in 2018, and its central change goes directly at the biggest of the problems we have just described. It replaces the handshake with one where listening to the exchange does not give you material you can take away and guess against offline. That is the important sentence. Under the old design, a listener could capture once and then guess forever, privately at whatever speed their hardware allowed. Under the new one, each guess has to be made against the live network, which sees every attempt and can slow them down. It turns an unlimited private problem into a limited public one. It also makes open networks less open by encrypting traffic even where there is no password at all, which is a genuine improvement for cafes and airports. It was not perfect either. In 2019, Mathy Vanhoef, who had published KRACK, together with A.L. Ronan, published a set of weaknesses they named Dragon Blood. 2 things in it are worth your attention. There were side channels in the new Handshake where timing and cache behavior leaked information about the password. And there were downgrade attacks, ways to make a device that supported the new standard fall back to the old one in a transition mode that existed for compatibility. That second one is a permanent lesson about security transitions. For years, the new system has to talk to the old system, and that compatibility bridge is a target for exactly as long as it exists. Those specific issues were addressed, but the pattern is worth keeping. Every generation is attacked at its joints, and every generation has a bridge back to the previous one. And the older standard has not gone anywhere. It is still running in an enormous number of homes, on routers nobody thinks about, and on devices that will never receive another update. A long tail that will last decades. So the honest position is not that WPA2 is broken. Patched implementations resist the attacks in this episode. A strong passphrase resists the rest. The honest position is that it does a narrow job well, and that almost everything people rely on it for is outside that job. So here are the 4 things I would actually want you to keep. 1. Protected means protected from people who do not have the password. It is never meant protected from people who do. Everyone you have ever given the password to is inside the boundary, and so is every device you gave it to, including the ones that stopped receiving updates years ago and are still quietly connected. Which makes the guest network the single most useful thing in this episode. It is a second password, making a second trust boundary. It is already in your router, and you can switch it on in about 90 seconds. Put the visitors on it. Put the television, the plugs, the camera, and the printer on it too. They do not need to be able to reach your laptop, and on one flat network they can. 2. The padlock in your browser is doing more of the work than your Wi-Fi password ever did, and it has been quietly doing it for years while the Wi-Fi password took the credit. Wi-Fi encryption stops at your router. Everything past that point is protected by the connection itself, and that protection is identical whether the network you are sitting on is locked or completely open. This is why public Wi-Fi became far less dangerous than its reputation. Not because Wi-Fi security improved, because the web became encrypted by default. The fix arrived 1 layer up. So the first rule is simple. Look for the padlock on every network, including your own at home. That is the one actually guarding the journey. 3. Your passphrase is the whole of the remaining defense, and length beats cleverness. Every attack we covered that goes after the password ends the same way, making guesses offline as fast as the hardware allows. Nothing rate limits that. Nothing locks anybody out. So the only variable that matters is how many guesses it would take. Next time you set one, ask yourself that question honestly. A long, genuinely unpredictable phrase makes the answer absurd. Your street name and a year does not, however many symbols you decorate it with. 4. Systems get defeated at the joints, not at the strong part. Not one attack in this episode broke the encryption. One went after a convenience feature added later. One went after a retry rule that existed because radio drops packets. One went after a compatibility bridge to an older standard. Every one of them was at a seam, and most seams exist because somebody made something more convenient or more compatible. That trade is usually right, and it is never free. So when you meet any system that claims to be secure, the question you can ask is not how strong is the lock. It is what got added around the lock and what does it still talk to that is older than it is. Guest network on, padlock everywhere, a long passphrase, and a healthy suspicion of convenience features. That is the whole episode, and none of it costs anything. Next week on Systems You Use Every Day, something that also authenticates a secret without ever authenticating distance. Your car key. It sits in a bowl in your hallway, and the car in the driveway asks it a question and unlocks when it hears the right answer. The system was built to check the answer. It was never built to check how far away it came from. Keyless entry, relay attacks, and the assumption nobody wrote down. That is next Tuesday. If this was useful, follow the channel, and I will see you then.